Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana, as well as the implications for coastal systems worldwide. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film about Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to produce this podcast series that will continue to explore important coastal issues through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. In this episode, we're speaking with Jessica Dandridge-Smith. Jessica is the Executive Director for the Water Collaborative, an organization dedicated to urban water management in the Greater New Orleans region. And now, our interview with Jessica Dandridge-Smith. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us today. So I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your background. So I know you have a lot of experience in community advocacy and engagement. So what was it that drew you to this type of work?
And I think about that question a lot. I was brought to this work actually by Hurricane Katrina, but I think the more I think about it as I get older, I think it was always around me and I couldn't put the pieces together. I grew up in New Orleans, by Dillard University by the London Avenue Canal. And saw the levees and saw how my family reacted when it came to water. I heard stories about Hurricane Betsy's and Camille, but it all didn't really come together until Hurricane Katrina. So Katrina hit on the day before my 16th birthday. And as you'd imagine, life changed very quickly. But I became really interested in how society works, how communities rebuild, and became a youth organizer about 6 months after Katrina, which was a great experience because it allowed me to learn how to organize, strategy, planning, all the things that required that. And it came full circle. I went and got my master's in international security, thinking I was going to go work overseas. And learning in that, I learned that climate and water was really the biggest national and international risk across, all sectors for the next, century, truly. And New Orleans was often the case study. So I realized in the classroom and in the workspace, I'm like, wait a minute, I am the case study. Why am I not the one teaching and also the one talking about the challenges and the realities of rebuilding and creating better societies? So all that to say, I worked quite a bit after that, but in 2019, the Water Collaborative kind of is a great place for me to hold all of my skill sets and my knowledge as well as my passions and curiosities.
Yeah, very interesting. I know it's like if you weren't aware of the challenges of water before Katrina, that definitely woke everyone up.
You had no choice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so with the Water Collaborative, what are some of the key issues that you're trying to tackle as an organization?
Yeah, so I try to not say everything, but it is quite a bit. We're the only organization that's dedicated to water in Southeast Louisiana and all water, right? So there's a lot of coastal organizations that we work with, but we're the only ones focused on utilities and water quality, which we kind of coined water justice. Mm-hmm. So the organization started back in 2013, but really kind of formalized in 2017 around nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, and that includes both urban as well as coastal restoration. But in 2020, during COVID, I had a lot of time on my hands, and we restructured to also include water affordability, access, and quality. That's a big umbrella, yeah. But it includes quite a few things, not just, it includes contaminants like lead and PFAS. We do work on insurance as well, and also state revolving funds, like really nitty gritty, nerdy policy things. But those things are what makes water work or not work in the state of Louisiana, and there needs more focus on that, and that's what we hope to do.
Yeah, that is a very broad. Water touches so many things.
It touches, and it's hard because everybody wants us to do. I get a lot of requests like, "Do you work on whales?" or reefs. I'm like, that is not my expertise. But because we hear water, I get a lot of interesting requests.
Yeah. And so, how would you define the term water justice?
Yeah, water, and we always say water is a human right? And I think that's a common term, but a lot of people don't actually know what that means in reality. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that inspired me to include that in our work, is I could see a lot of climate organizations nationally and internationally saying water is a human right. But I'm like, but how do you make it a human right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen overnight. There needs to be policies and systems and procedural structural structures that actually create that environment. So water justice is really honing in on water as a public utility or public right. So anti-privatization of water and water systems. Water justice is making sure it's affordable for all. And that does not include, like, for example, payment plans, right? We live in our lovely city of New Orleans, where we have very high water bills. In fact, the most inequitable water utility in the nation. And most people don't even realize that. But when you do a payment plan, that's actually not affordability. That just means that you're stacking bills in an even way. So how do we make water affordable? And lastly is access to water. Many people in Louisiana, we don't talk about, don't have access to water, but they talk about it nationally, right? If you live on tribal lands or in rural communities, Appalachia, they have the lack of access to water, but it shouldn't just be for those who are privileged. You need water to live. You need water for your health, your mind, your body, your spirit. And then the last thing is that water is joy. I think, especially in Louisiana, we think of water in a very trauma-induced place, rightfully so. But how do we find joy in that water? And I think there's a lot of ways we find joy. We oftentimes skip over it or we don't think about it. But when you get on an airboat or a canoe or a kayak, so water justice is a holistic understanding of how we as human beings have relationships with water and the ecosystems that it provides.
And so can you tell me more about the Water Collaborative's approach to stormwater management and how you're working to combat the flooding issues that New Orleans often faces?
Yeah, well, bringing it back to Katrina, that was a eye-opening moment for a lot of people. And we've always lived with great infrastructure. I would say always, but the last 100 years or so, right? Since the Great Flood of 1927, we've always lived with great infrastructure systems. But as we've seen time and time again, they have not worked very well for us. Even before the Great Flood, creating levees and ditches, working against nature was not the way. And we've seen that culminate into Katrina. I think that nature-based solutions not only is a solution to solve flooding, it solves so many things. It is an important aspect of quality of life improvement. It's an important aspect of economy. When you put in nature-based solutions, you improve property value, but you also improve economic opportunities, reduces heat island effect. It is great for, talk about our ecosystem and, butterflies and birds. It has a holistic effect. So when you put in just one simple tree, you see things around you immediately change. And then you do more of that, right? You talk about bioswales and French drains and all of that, you see so much change. So for us, nature-based solutions goes back to that water justice concept, right? It's a holistic, intersectional way of looking at the world. And the last thing I'll say is that it improves economic outcomes for individuals that have been stagnant. I'm born and raised here, as I mentioned. I've been a bartender, I've been a waitress, and I have great respect for those roles. But the problem is that those wages stay stagnant. Mm-hmm. If you go into nature-based solutions, there's a plethora of opportunity for you. You could be a young person formerly incarcerated. You could be a PhD. You could be an engineer. There's lots of entry points, but the starting salary, even for someone who is a young person, is $15 an hour. You can't start there ever in service industry jobs. So it really lifts all ships, as they say, right? Once we put those green infrastructure improvements in, not only do you see immediate flood reduction, you see a different way of looking at the world. We are a sponge city, and we need to live and act that way. And for years, I always joke, I said, we think we're Arizona, but we're not. And if you look at other cities, not just the Netherlands, but looking at parts of China, parts of Latin America, where they're doing this, they're seeing immense improvements. I see green infrastructure not only as a way forward for a changing climate, but a changing ecosystem and economy for our city and our state.
Yeah. And so what are some other examples of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? Like you mentioned bioswales.
Yeah.
What are some other ones?
There's so many. And I think I was just in a discussion last week and somebody's like, what is nature-based solutions? And they're like, it's right in front of you. It's hidden a lot of times. But besides French drains and bioswales, there's rain gardens that are really popular. There are planter boxes that are really popular. And I've seen some really unique planter boxes, especially in Bywater, right, where you'd actually turn like a bathtub or a toilet into a planter box. It's possible. Anything that can hold water and move it away slowly, you're doing that job. So permeable pavers is really popular. Permeable cement or gravel is something also that's really popular. And you can use multiple systems, right? So when you do a retrofitting of your home or your business, you don't have to just use one thing. It doesn't have to all be permeable pavers unless that's what you want. Or you can have that. You can have that mixed with gravel. You can have it mixed with greenery. I think the more green space you have, the better. And I think also one thing that I often get a lot of times is, well, I don't want to have to clean my yard all the time. There are native plants that you don't have to do that. You let them grow wild, you let them be, and you only need to prune them once or twice a year. So I think there's a lot of options for people who hate greenery, which are a lot of people. Like I said, I don't know what happened in Louisiana where we don't like trees, but I get it a lot where people were like, I'm just going to chop down my tree because I don't want to do these leaves. I'm like,
Yeah.
That's a very short-sighted benefit when, if you have a tree in front of your house, it reduces not only the heat, but it also reduces flooding and it actually beautifies your home and it has a great impact on your value. But I think there's a lot of options for people. And the thing that the key takeaway is it doesn't have to be, it could be as obvious as you want it to be. It could be as hidden as you want it to be. And it could fit your lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. Why is it important for you all as an organization to emphasize the collaboration aspect of things, between our communities, our governments, and other stakeholders in terms of developing a water management plan for the city?
Oh my gosh, I think about that a lot. It's in our name, but it's a core value. We can't get to a better society if we're not thinking about one another. And the reason why water has played such a traumatic role in Southeast Louisiana, and I would even argue some parts of the country, is because we don't collaborate. Water knows no bounds. It doesn't care about your levees. It doesn't care about your coastlines. It moves where it wants to move, and water is powerful. The moment you start not thinking about your neighbor, the moment you put up a wall, you put up a levee or any kind of system that harms another community, it is bound to happen. And you may even hurt yourself in the process. But when you think about water in terms of watersheds, right? And that's what a lot of people are moving toward. Thinking about us in a holistic society, you can benefit everybody. I think also that you have to also understand the underlying realities of, how we've seen colonization impact communities, forced removal of indigenous communities, obviously enslavement, and so on, right? We can look at every single, I like to call them all the isms, right? There's a lot of isms, but environment has been a key player in people's oppression and marginalization in this country. And so in order to see a better future, in order to adapt to not only a changing climate, but also a changing society, you have to think of things holistically. I find that when you collaborate with other people, you find people leaving the room happier, even if you don't get what you want, because we need that human interaction and you want to be heard and they want to be heard. I often get people fussing at me all the time. They think I'm the bills guru, right? They like, oh, she works in water. I like complain to her about my water bill. But sometimes it's just about listening to people. And so collaboration can be as simple as, what do you have to say? And actively listening and actively participating in that conversation. A lot of times people who are given the role to do infrastructure, engineers, architects, you name them, planners, they have a hard time listening. And if you can't listen, you can't collaborate. And if you can't collaborate, you create not just physical walls, but metaphysical walls. People lose that interest in you. So I think collaboration is important. And the last thing I'll say is that collaboration's hard. I think I talked to an engineer at the state level and they said something to the effect of, engagement and collaboration isn't a science. And I was like, but it is a science. There's a lot of people who have PhDs in how we engage with one another, how we listen to each other, behavioral scientists, sociologists, political science. Listening is a key part of the social sciences, and how do you listen in different contexts. And so if we respect collaboration as a science and respect it as a tool, you'll get better outcomes across all aspects of society. So for us, collaboration isn't just about a better society that manages water. It's about building a better society overall.
Yeah. It's like collaboration doesn't just happen. You have to kind of embed it into the structure of how you do things.
And it's an area of study. I always get sadly, I get people who are professionals who are like, I had a meeting and no one showed up. And I said, did you talk to anybody about it? It doesn't just happen. It is a concerted effort. But when you put that concerted effort in, you get a lot more out of it.
Yeah. So I know one of the ways that you all are engaging with the public is with the Water Flows Forward project.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to ask if you could tell us more about what that project's all about and how it works.
Yeah, talk about collaboration. So that project was born out of COVID, right? It was how do we engage with creators, students, which we've always done in a way that is exciting, but not so burdensome. And so we worked with different partners across multiple fields. We worked with an arborist. We worked with, or working with, because we're still doing that, creators, manufacturers, scientists, on how to create systems, and when I say systems, actual green infrastructure systems that have co-benefits. And I think that's a lot of things that people are looking at, like how do you build something that has multiple benefits? So the Water Flows Forward is really a competition program that seeks to support a community or multiple communities through usually a very simple planter box. And you would think, again, we talked about planter boxes being bathtubs and toilets, right? But planter boxes can have dual use, but they can also beautify your property. And so the first year, it was about creating a planter box that could grow food and store up to 40 gallons of water, and which has been incredibly successful. We ended up creating our very first planter box. It's beautiful. We have a 10 around the city, and we hope to start selling them soon. I will say how successful the first one is that I have not touched it. I'm not a green thumb girl, despite me being in this field. I struggle with planting, especially like fruits and vegetables. I don't do very well with those, but I put those things in and they're still growing through drought, and we're on Claiborne Avenue. And for those who are not familiar, that's a very industrial, not a lot. It's all sun, no shade. There's, air pollution from highways. My produce is growing really well without me touching it. That speaks volumes about the planter box. And then 2 years ago, we did one on a floating planter box for indigenous communities living along coastal Louisiana. So we're almost to the end of that one. We had a little bit of a struggle because finding a planter box that can actually float and not tip over is much more challenging than you thought, but we're still working with the designers. So to get to this point, we had to have multiple conversations with planners, with engineers, with architects, landscape architects, and again, thinking about communities as well. So how do we get an indigenous community in the room with the judges to really decide what this looks like? I can't even tell you how challenging it is. You think it's easy on the surface, but to come up even with the specs, right? And what actually works in a coastal area, what the communities need, the height, the width, the color even. Are things that people were thinking about. So it is a very detailed project, but we're really excited about the outcome. And we hope by 2025 to actually have them on the market for other people to purchase.
What do you think has been some of the Water Collaborative's biggest accomplishments so far in your history?
Oh my goodness. I've been here for 5 years, so I've seen a lot of change. I think one is a change in the narrative. I think that's one of the things that we work really hard to do is making things approachable and interesting. As somebody who's a policy nerd, I read all day. I read I wake up and I open up the Guardian, right? And I think this is exciting for me, but is this exciting for the average person? Absolutely not. And I'm very aware of that. And so how do we make news, especially policy news, interesting and informative and engaging? So we've been working, for example, with like artists. We have a Brackish Artist Collective. And the other thing I think that has changed as well is like on the policy side, we've seen a lot of improvement on the stormwater management side. I mean, in my 5 years here, I've seen the city change so much. There's still a very, very long way to go. But to see even the way people behave about these ideas, when I started, there was a lot of anxiety and fear, and people now demand it. They want to see it. They want to see more of it. How can I get it? There are grants for me that I can participate in to get these on my home, to get these improvements in my home. And then finally, there's like the big arch, right? There's policy changes on the federal side that we've been working really hard on, water affordability, state revolving funds, which again is like really deep, nerdy stuff, but basically getting more money into our utilities, particularly our rural communities and our disadvantaged communities. And then we're also working on a stormwater fee for New Orleans, which has been a huge undertaking, but also very exciting. The Water Justice Fund is what we call it, and it would be the first ever stormwater fee for New Orleans if successful. And it's already successful because it's the first ever community-created, community-led stormwater fee in the entire nation. And so even by its being, it's already something that's exciting. So we're changing the narrative, I think, and that's exciting. We have like 12,000 followers on Instagram, and I don't know how that happened, and it keeps growing every day. And I think it's because we are sharing ideas and communicating about basic things like rain barrels and reverse osmosis, but also big ideas like, water affordability crisis across the nation, privatization crises. We're combining that and making a space for people to feel comfortable to talk about big ideas around water.
Yeah, that is all very exciting.
Yeah.
And lastly, I just wanted to ask if you had any upcoming projects or initiatives on the horizon that you're looking forward to at the moment.
Oh my gosh, I think I mentioned it. We have a very busy spring and summer. I think the few things that are really big, we're going to be doing lead testing in New Orleans. A lot of people don't know about the lead risk. And actually this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Flint crisis. And so New Orleans is in its own crisis. We've never mapped our lead lines ever. And Sewage and Water Board is taking advantage of that, and they are trying to map, but we still want people to be aware of the risk. We tried for a long time to educate people on lead, and they were like, oh, whatever. But no, it's huge. If you get lead in your body, it cannot come out. There is no cure for lead. And I think there's a misinformation about that. So we are hoping to test for lead, but also run an educational campaign. The other thing we're going to be doing is mention the stormwater fee or the water justice fund. We're hoping that the city council and the mayor take it seriously. There's a lot of changes at the governor's side and sewage and water board side, but there's still opportunity to make New Orleans better. And our plan isn't just about a fee. And by the way, there's a whole thing about fees, right? I could spend an hour talking to you about fees. But I think the key is that water financing needs to be democratized, it needs to be equitable, and it needs to be just. And that's what we're hoping to do. And so we're going to be doing town halls, we're going to be doing merchant walks, we're going to be doing community conversations for the next several months. We're also going to be talking a lot about lead again and PFAS and other contaminants. So making these conversations approachable, making them open and interesting is really our goal. And we hope to achieve that this summer.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've had a wonderful time talking with you.
Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Jessica Dandridge-Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can find our feature-length documentary On Our Watch, as well as a video version of today's episode, in the links below. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through support from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.